Have you noticed that the film look is back? Now, if your only frame of reference is YouTube tutorials, my own included, then you may think that, well, it never actually left. But what I've noticed this year in particular is that a lot of TV shows are starting to embrace this look. The Studio, Seth Rogen's new show, shot digitally, but aesthetically pulling a lot from the film look. White Lotus, again, always shot beautifully, but this most recent season in particular, halation has featured quite prominently, again, a quality borrowed from film. And Black Mirror, season 7, one episode in particular, Plaything, borrows so heavily from the film look that it is, or at least does seem to be, emulating film quite intentionally. So in this video, I want to explore a plugin that lets you achieve this filmic look surprisingly quickly and surprisingly easy. It's called Dehancer. First off, this video is not sponsored by Dehancer whatsoever. They are not telling me what to say. They haven't given me any sort of instruction. They're not going to see this video before it's uploaded. But in return, they are giving me a lifetime license to use it. So take some of my words with a grain of salt. But again, everything is my own honest thoughts and feelings. If the plugin sucked, I'd still be making this video, but with a lifetime license to a plugin that sucks. So, while we're on the topic, what does suck about it? Easy, the price. The price sucks. It's $449 USD, almost $630 here in Canada for Dehancer Pro lifetime license for Resolve. I'm using this all in Resolve. That's more than Resolve Studio itself. Heck, that's even Switch 2 territory. And look, I've got a little bit more about this to say at the end, so do stick around. Another thing is that there is a bit of a learning curve to using it. The documentation that comes with the plugin wasn't all that helpful, and it took me a while to figure out the workflow properly. But how does it actually work? Well, let's hop into Resolve and just show you, because that's a lot easier. Now, there are a few different ways of applying Dehancer in your node tree. You can apply it as a standalone node where you do pretty much everything inside of it. You can set your source to be Rec 709, so if you've already transformed your log footage into Rec 709, you can use this method. Or again, there's a bunch of different other options here, DaVinci Wide Gamut, but I'm gonna go and choose a camera. Again, there's a bunch of different ones you can choose from here. Panasonic, it loads up something, and I'm just going to make sure I hit S5 II. There are a bunch of different little tabs here in Dehancer. This is where that initial learning curve comes in, because I had no idea where I should be starting. But to break it down, you have your input tab here. This is kind of like if you had a node beforehand and you wanted to change your exposure and stuff. You can pull up your waveform, adjust your exposure here, all that lark. So instead of doing that, you can just do it here. And you can do exposure, temperature, tint, and then even have defringing, which if your footage has any sort of like chromatic aberration, you can change it here because that will affect halation and bloom later on the chain. I'm just going to take you through my process, which I learned from one of Dehancer's own videos on their channel. Anyway, what I like to do is I come down to my print settings first. Now, I've found that the print settings give me the most sort of naturalistic response to the footage. First, you can go and you can choose your profile. You can have linear, which is standard, film log, or you can choose a print film stock. So you can do something like the Fujifilm print or the classic Kodak 2383. Now, what's interesting about the way the print settings handle exposure versus the input settings is that if you take a look at the waveform, it doesn't actually shift or alter uniformly. You see different parts of the image change or are affected more than other parts of the image. Next, what you can do is choose a film stock or film profile. There are so many to choose from, some ranging from actual film stocks they run through a film camera at no less, or photographic stocks like Portra 400, 800, Ilford HP5, that's a very classic one. Even Fuji Instax. I'm gonna stick with something cinematic. I'll go with the Vision 350D, D for daylight. The way that Dehancer have designed this is that they basically sampled each film stock that's listed here against the real thing at 3 different exposures. So at the middle, you just have standard dead-on exposure, and then you can see how the film's affected when it's underexposed, and then how it's overexposed. And what's interesting is each stock, whether it is film positive, film negative, photographic, cinematic, each stock reacts differently to this push-pull slider. Okay, so once I have that, I like to go over to the expand. I'll enable that, and I'll start trying to dial in my black and white points. So I want something a little faded, and I'll bring the whites down a little bit here so it doesn't look super contrasty. Then we can come up to the film developer. Now, I'm just going to use the color boost section here to bring some kind of saturation back into it. But again, the way that it adds that saturation just looks very natural, doesn't come across overly digital at all, which is quite nice. Now, what's nice about the film developer tab is that if your camera or log profile isn't a part of the settings here, or you don't know what it is, then if you're just working on a log, you can use the film developer section to bring the image somewhere that's closer to Rec 709. You can start working with it there. And once I'm happy with that, I'm going to come over to our film compression. Now, what this does is compresses the highlights mostly. Similar to the way that film has a really nice natural highlight roll-off, you can compress your highlights here to get a very similar effect, and then you can just kind of dial in that look until you're happy with how it is. Now, if we come down to the color head, this is somewhat similar to printer lights, where you can start adjusting different color channels or color values. You have your yellow, blue, magenta, green, cyan, red here, and then if your footage is looking particularly blue or red anyway, you can kind of dial that in, change it out, magenta, you can make more magenta, more green, etc. But what you can also do is start dialing in a look or customizing your look with these slides. And then underneath you have your shadow tone, mid-tone, and highlight tone, which you can use to then start split toning. So I really like the look of introducing a little warmth to those highlights. You kind of get a little bit of that teal orange look, but nothing too intense, which is really quite nice. So I'm realizing I'm also doing this with these colored shades on, which I wouldn't recommend typically. But once you have that look dialed in, I like to start applying the effects, and this is where you really start getting that film look. So let's add some grain. Similar to Resolve's own grain tools, it has its own like a built-in profiles, but you can choose a custom profile and dial that in exactly how you want, including this cool little tab called film, or slider called film resolution, which hard to notice, but it actually adds a degree of blur to the footage underneath it, depending on the grain response, similar to how actual grain reacts on film, which personally, this is one of my favorite parts of Dehancer. And you can kind of see, if I bring that way down, you can see that there is a slight blur being applied to the footage. There's also halation, comes in all its various different profiles, does what it says on the tin, but what I really like, aside from halation, is the bloom effect. I feel like the bloom in Dehancer just looks really natural, really nice. There are also settings for film damage if you want to add these kind of like hairs and dust and scratches to the film stock. One of the other effects in Dehancer, which I haven't really seen replicated inside Resolve yet, is the film breath. This is actually quite cool. It is a lot, but what it does is subtly shifts the colors and the hues in the different parts of the image to kind of give this damaged film kind of look. Gate weave, similar to what's inside the film look creator here, just creates those little micro jitters at the corner of an image. overscan. This is very similar to the film gate that's in Film Look Creator, but not as customizable as I think I would like. There are a bunch of different gate types that you can kind of mess around with. And lastly, they have vignettes. Now, there's also a bunch of different monitoring options, such as false color. You can change the actual total effects being used. You can also create LUTs inside of Dehancer if you want to be able to take the look that you've created here and then view it on a monitor when you're actually on set. But you can see that it didn't take all that much time or all that much effort to get an image that looks pretty good. Like, I'd probably work with this a little bit more. I think a neat thing that you can do is add the color slice tool beforehand and add a little bit of density there. You can augment it with all the other tools inside of Resolve to really nail the look that you're trying to get. So I've really enjoyed using Dehancer. I can get great looking results easily and quickly, and it doesn't chug my computer to a snail's pace. And look, to be honest, you can achieve 90% of the results from Dehancer just using the tools inside Resolve Studio. If I put on my freelance video producer hat or videographer hat, or I'm talking to someone like that, it's hard to justify. It is a steep price. Now, if you were part of an agency or a production company, then it's easier to justify the price, and I do think it's worth it then. But as an individual, I don't know if I can recommend getting the full lifetime license for that price point. Just hopping in here for a second, the tools inside Dehancer are probably about 10% better than the tools that you can find in Resolve, or at least the equivalent. But I've been talking as if you have to buy it as this whole $700 or $600 Canadian package, when in fact on Dehancer's website, you can just go and buy the individual tools if you want. Yes, so you can buy Dehancer Pro. This is the one that I've been using. It costs a lot, but they also have Dehancer Lite if you just want a few of the effects, or if you just want to get them alone, to buy the film grain or the bloom, they just cost $100 for the lifetime license, which, hey, that's still a lot of money, but is a little easier to justify if you just want a single effect. But what do you think? Is the price too high, or is it totally fair given what you can do with the app? And also, if you're curious about other means of getting the film look, then goodness, you're in the right place, because I have so many other videos talking about it, which you may enjoy. Anyway, my name is Robin, and I'll see you in the next one. Slán leat.